Now, judges often have to see a lot of horrible cases up close, but when the judge on this Florida case called it the worst case she's ever seen, you know it has to be something especially upsetting. And worst of all, the guy who did it doesn't seem to be the slightest bit sorry. If anything, he enjoyed all the attention it brought to him. Pretty gross, right? Let's dive in. Kenyatta Barron, often known as Kiki, was a 33-year-old mother of two. She lived in Hillsborough, Florida. She was studying at a local college and seemed to be making the best of her life. Her little daughter, Ronnie IV, had severe autism. Her son, Ronnie IV, had a special way of communicating with his sister, and despite their difficulties, they all seemed to be getting along really well. There was only one big issue. Kenyatta's ex, the dad to her two children, Ronnie Barron III, lived with them. They weren't even dating anymore, but she still allowed him to stay in the house. However, they frequently argued and the police had been called there quite a few times. One time, Ronnie had thrown a wrench through a car windshield because she wouldn't let him take the car. Lots of things like that went on. So I get the impression that she really wanted him gone as soon as possible. Then on March 18th, 2018, police were called to Kenyatta's house because the couple was fighting again, very loudly and only this time, it turned out to be much more deadly. At about 11 p.m., police received a 911 call of a terrified woman calling for help. They heard a man in the background yelling, "Allah Akbar." Then the woman was screaming, "I'm so sorry, Ronnie," until it cut off. But not long afterward, a man called 911 from the same location. He told them,
"Hey, I just been attacked by some white demons."
Neighbor Carol Piantiello later said that she heard a shotgun go off. All of a sudden, I heard a loud bang. I mean, it was so loud it scared me. When the police ambulance crews arrived, a woman was lying motionless on the lawn. As they rushed to help her, they realized that a fire had started inside the house. As the first responders rushed in to check it out, a little boy came out. He was covered in burn marks and some horrible lacerations to his stomach. First responders reported he said, "My dad killed my mom." This was Ronnie IV, and he was taken straight to the hospital. But the deceased woman on the lawn was poor Kenyatta, and inside the house, they found remains of her disabled daughter. They had both been shot and attacked with a hatchet. It didn't take them long to figure out who had done it. Ronnie O'Neill III was picked up by the cops the next morning. Although he strongly resisted arrest, they had to tase him before it was possible to bring him in. Once the case went to trial in 2021, with many delays due to the virus, he insisted on representing himself in court. The judge went through all the proper checks to make sure he was fit to do it, and it turned out he was considered perfectly fine to give it a try. After all, he believed that the Most High God had advised him to. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, you might have heard that there's this pretty famous phrase that says, "A man who defends himself has a fool for a client." Although, maybe Ice-T put it best on Twitter. When you've watched too much Law and Order and you think you can defend yourself, not a great idea. Just saying. And well, both of these statements were soon proven completely true.
And the evidence is going to show we are under some of the most vicious, lying, fabricating, fictitious government you ever seen.
Quick life tip here, but if you're ever in court, probably don't do any of this. His aggressive opening statement went on for 30 minutes. He went on to claim that the police and even the highest parts of the American government had made changes to that awful 911 call to make him look more guilty. Now, he might have had a hazy idea of what evidence actually was, but he really seemed to think a higher power might help him out.
Evidence is going to show I look alone, but I am backed by a mighty God.
When he was playing back Kenyatta's desperate 911 call from that night, Ronnie was much more concerned about how he sounded in the background.
Listen to the background.
Well, the call pretty much speaks for itself, but he also didn't deny doing any of it. Not really. He even questioned his own son about what he'd done to him that night. Out of all the craziness that he brought into the courtroom, this part was definitely the worst, but probably also made sure he wasn't getting away with any of it.
And how did I hurt you?
You stabbed me.
That's so awful. His father had also tried to set him on fire that night. At least he didn't have to be in the same room as Ronnie. The questioning was all done remotely, but that must have been like reliving the trauma all over again. And Ronnie wasn't the tiniest bit empathetic about what he'd inflicted. In fact, Ronnie continued to insist that his son was making most of it up and had been coached for what he said. That's despite the attack on Kenyatta being literally the first thing his son said when he woke up in the hospital. Oh, and during his closing statement, Ronnie totally admitted admitted to Kenyatta's homicide.
I did kill Kenyatta Barron, but I want you to tell it like it is.
So the judge looks completely baffled by this guy. I mean, we all are, right? But generously, I'd say he got caught up in the details, either out of denial or because he's determined not to accept what he did. Just speculation though, I wouldn't want to get too far inside his head to figure it out. Way too scary. It was only when it was clear that he might be facing an actual death sentence that Ronnie finally asked for a qualified lawyer to represent him. You could say it was a little bit too late. But how does someone get into that state of mind? Let's just take a quick look at Ronnie's early life. This is in no way a defense of what he did, but he did have a pretty awful time at first. He and his brother were by teenage relatives when they were only little. He would always act like it didn't bother him, but I could tell that it bothered him. When he was younger, he was often talking to God while standing on roofs and in trees, and believed he was invincible and ordained by God. But he went on to live in a fairly stable home, although he never knew his biological dad. He sang in a church choir, played football at high school, and was in the Reserve Officer Training Corps. Though school was a bit of a struggle, he still graduated. He wanted to be in the U.S. Marine Corps, but never passed the entrance exam. He was pretty creative musically and was in a hip-hop duo while holding down a couple of ordinary jobs. Now, he got into Islam group as he got older. They were actually trying to stop gang violence. But only 5 months before he attacked Kenyatta and her daughter, Ronnie was badly wounded in a drive-by attack. He flatlined 4 times during surgery for that, but made a complete recovery. A forensic psychologist testified that the drive-by and the childhood trauma led Ronnie to develop PTSD, and he also has a delusional disorder. In prison, he compared himself to famous leaders and thought that agents of organizations like the FBI, CIA, and religious groups were out to get him. I mean, this is just the background on Ronnie. It sure doesn't excuse anything he did, but he definitely needs and needed a lot more help. During sentencing in June 2021, he finished with,
"I am not sorry for something I didn't do, and I am not sorry for the things I did do."
Well, he should be. The case even traumatized the people covering it. The first responders were torn up by what they saw in the house.
I found that I was slipping, which I couldn't figure out why. So I ducked down to the ground to try to see exactly what I was slipping on, and I realized that the floor was covered in blood.
The judge on this case, Michelle Cisco, was utterly horrified by the whole thing.
This is the worst case I have ever seen.
And the case is going to stick with her for a very long time.
Because there is no way any person with any feeling could have witnessed or seen the photos of what occurred that night and not be haunted for the rest of your life. I know I will be. For the rest of my life, I'll be haunted by what I saw as far as the evidence and just the abject cruelty of it all. The abject cruelty.
It's uncomfortable enough to watch him rant and deny anything, and at no point is he, like, human about any of the horrible things that he did to his family. As it came to an end, they had to ask him to stop swearing in his closing arguments. He kept on claiming the 911 call was sped up, but as the prosecutor pointed out, Ronnie had no pity for her, no sympathy for her. What you heard in that call was utter indifference to the suffering of Kenyatta Barron. The whole trial took 3 weeks, but the jury only took about 2 hours to convict him on all charges. He avoided the ultimate penalty only because every juror had to agree to it. On June 25th, 2021, Ronnie was sentenced to jail for the rest of his life and given 3 entire life sentences with another 60 years on top of that. So he's not getting out anytime soon. Kenyatta's family is super glad about that. Kenyatta's sister, Daisada, said, "I still feel like it's a win because he does not leave that prison wherever he's taken unless it's in a box." Now, the happiest thing to come out of all of this is that Ronnie O'Neal IV was adopted by the first responding detective on the scene. Of course, he misses his family.
And she was just a good mom. My sister, she couldn't talk, but she still could move her head and say, we used to do sign language. She was very nice.
But now he's with the Blair family and says, "They are really nice people. They are the best moms and dads, and they take really good care of me. There's no one else better than them." So I totally hope he can continue to get over that awful night and that he has a good future ahead of him, because no one deserves to be defined by what that guy did. What do you think about the case? Do you think Ronnie III is even capable of feeling sorry for what he did? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below.